Amen. Amen. I want to look at a passage with you this morning, and it's found in Mark chapter 4. It's talking about the seed that fell on good ground and yielded a crop that sprang up and increased and produced, some 30-fold, some 60, and some 100-fold. And then Jesus explains this verse, and he says, "But these are the ones sown on good ground, those who hear the word, accept it, and bear fruit, some 30, some 60, and some 100. What is the fruit of a Christian? Another Christian, right? What is the fruit of a church? Another church. The fruit of a church is another church. So if your church is fruitful, you'll be starting another church. Imagine if the headlines were to come out in the Wall Street Journal, and it says, 96% of women are now infertile in the United States. Would we have a major problem on our hands? The human race would be at risk, right? And yet, 96% of churches never give birth to another church. I think the future of Christianity is at stake if we're not giving birth to churches because populations are growing. We need churches planted to reach the growing populations. And as I look at this passage and think about 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold, if we can have a bumper crop, let's do it. Why can't we as the Adventist Church lead the way in starting new churches and entering new territories and reaching new people groups? So where I wanted to go today as we close our week together is we've been looking all week at the fruit of a Christian, which is to produce another Christian, to share our faith, to be on a rescue mission. And I wanted to close this week by looking at the fruit of another church, of a church is to produce another church. I had a little problem getting here on time this morning. You know, Pastor Brad has done a couple things to me this week that have been quite eventful. On Monday, he texted me and asked if I wanted to play some tennis. And Pastor Brad and I played tennis together. When he was pastor in Texas, we'd meet and play tennis together. So we have fun and can have a good time with it. The problem was I was already down by the tennis courts, and I didn't want to walk all the way back to the Terrace Hotel to get my tennis shoes. So I played him tennis barefoot. And we played for quite a while. I mean, at least the ground was shaded where I was playing, but that was, my feet were very sore for a couple of days. But then Pastor Brad keeps talking about this fun run. And so I got up this morning, and here's my family ready for the fun run. And if we can put that up on the screen. It looks like we're having fun at that moment, right? But the fun only lasted for about 100 meters. And look at these children that were ahead of me in the race. That was a little bit discouraging. I did pick up my pace and pass them before the end. But when those little girls ran past me, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not good. Both my boys passed me. I think my mom set a record as one of the oldest women to run the race. But I think I heard in the 5K there was a 92-year-old man that ran the 5K. Isn't that great? Wow, there's a health message right there, isn't there? All right, well, let's continue here with our quiz now. How often does a new Seventh-day Adventist church start? Somewhere in the world. How often does a new Seventh-day Adventist church start? Once an hour, once every 3.5 hours, once every day and a half, or once every 9 days? Let's actually take a vote on this question because I'm going to answer this one very quickly in our presentation today. So let's take a vote on which one you think it would be true. How many think a new Adventist church starts every hour? Raise your hand up. Okay, very good. How many would say every 3.5 hours a new Adventist church starts? A few more for that one. How many say once every day and a half? Most of the hands on that one. How many say once every 9 days? Oh, maybe there's just as many for that one. We will find out in just a moment. How did Nina find the epic Seventh-day Adventist church plant? She was looking for a job as a bartender. Someone knocked on her door. She received a Beast brochure, or an Adventist had a spiritual conversation with her. All right? Third question here. Everett Samuel, this is Pastor Everett Samuel, is planting a church in New York City to reach the affluent, single moms, homeless, or young families. What employment does a pastor in Thailand have that helps people and introduce them to Jesus? Is he a soccer coach, a mushroom farmer, recycling, or a bus driver? So those are questions that you can listen for. In 2014, and we're still waiting to get the final statistics for 2015, but in 2014, 2,446 new Seventh-day Adventist churches were planted. That is a record. That is the most that we have ever planted at any time in our history. Now again, I don't know the stats yet for last year, but that is good news, isn't it? That equates to one new Adventist church every 3.5 hours is starting somewhere in the world. Isn't that exciting? We can call ourselves a movement. Now the reality is we need to plant more churches than that. In particular, as we look at it, 3,197 new members join the Seventh-day Adventist Church every day. That's 133 new Adventists every single hour. Now, if you take the every 3.5 hours there's a new church that's starting, that means if you count the number of baptisms coming in, that you're trying to put 476 people into one church plant. Now, we recognize that established churches are holding meetings or bringing people in as well, and some of these new people will go to those churches. But I don't know of very many church plants that have 476 people attending, which tells me we're not planting enough churches to even keep up with our baptisms. So we need to about double the number of church plants in order to keep up with the number of baptisms that we're having. Well, I want to give you a little bit of a tour around North America and even the world regarding church planting. Some people I talk with are very discouraged because they're part of a plateaued or declining church and they don't see much vibrancy in their local church, and that's not the reality of Adventism that I see. I'm able to work with church plants, with new growth, and I see Adventist members and pastors that are passionate about God's work. And so I get to see the positive side of Adventism, the growth side of Adventism, and it's exciting. But because some of you haven't been able to take the tours and see those things like I've been able to, I wanted to give you a tour this morning of some of the hot spots, some of the places where the Adventist church is really doing well. Well, one place the Adventist church was not doing well is in the city of St. Louis. The city of St. Louis had the least number of Adventist churches when compared to the population. Only one Adventist church for every 192,000 people. The least densely populated in terms of Adventist presence, Adventist churches in the United States. So we began working with them through the North American Division Evangelism Institute. We brought a number of seminars to the city of St. Louis, good attendance. And the final seminar, they had one a year, the final training that we did was in the area of church planting. We did that training in a hotel, and 150 people registered to come and learn about church planting. Well, that was quite exciting. And so on Friday night before we began, they're paying to be in a hotel and registered and so on for 15 hours of training about church planting. Very exciting. So I'm really looking forward to what God is going to do. And as we meet on Friday night with the pastors, I said, pastors, wow, we have a good turnout here tonight. How many new churches would you like to see started as a result of this weekend? What's your faith? What can God do? They said, Pastor, it would be great if we could have one new church. I was underwhelmed. What? One new church? 150 people here and we're going to just start one new church? I said, what if we could have one new church for every pastor that's represented here? There's about 10 pastors here. What if we could see 10 new churches start here in St. Louis? Oh, that would be amazing. It's not possible, but it'd be amazing. That was the kind of mindset they had. Well, by the end of that weekend, we had 16 people volunteer, lay people that said they were willing to lead a church plant. 16, not one, 16. Today, 7 of those church plants have started, and one of those church plants is focused on teenagers. The Wentzville Youth Church Plant, a couple of parents said, you know what, we have teenage children, they're going to high school. Let's just turn our kids loose. Tell them to go invite their friends to come to our house for Friday night to have a meal together and a Bible study. Well, free food and teenagers, that works very well, doesn't it? And so they began packing their house out with teenagers that were enjoying the fellowship, enjoying the food, but ready to study the Bible as well. They've had baptisms from that, and it's just been a tremendous ministry there. in Wentzville in the St. Louis area. In Edmonton, Alberta, something happened that I have not seen happen in a first world country anywhere in the world yet. Two pastors of fairly large churches, 300 to 500 member churches, these two pastors met with their church boards and said, we feel convicted that we need to go out and plant a new church. As your pastor, we need to spend 20% of our time with you and 80% of our time going out to start a new church. How many of your church boards, would your church board be willing to vote such a proposal? Well, they voted it. John Bradshaw came in and did a citywide meeting, and they were able to plant 2 new churches in Edmonton, and for 1 year, 80% of the pastor's time was spent helping support and raise up that new church. Isn't that exciting? I think we need to see more of that happening. But again, sometimes it's the members that are holding the pastors back and say, we need you to take care of us. We need you to look over us. And Ellen White says if the members of the church can't stand alone without the help of a pastor, that they need to be rebaptized. Did you know she said that? They need to be converted anew. They need to be baptized again. That's what she says. We become too pastor dependent in North America, and it makes for religious weaklings. We need to all be working in the cause of God. And at times, your pastor may need to be freed up to go start new work. In fact, Ellen White supports that concept. I want to share this quote with you. Instead of keeping the ministers at work for the churches that already know the truth, let the members of the churches say to these laborers, go work for souls that are perishing in darkness. We ourselves will carry forward the services of the church. We will keep up the meetings, and by abiding in Christ, we'll maintain spiritual life. We will work for souls that are about us, and we will send our prayers and our gifts to sustain the laborers in more needy and destitute fields. We need to get back to our early Adventism roots when we were a movement. A movement needs to have momentum. And in the world field, certainly there are places where the Adventist church has momentum. In North America, we need to pick up the speed. We need to be planting more churches. We need to be growing more rapidly. But to do that, we need to free up our pastors. We need to be less pastor dependent. And we need to see pastors and lay people working together hand in hand to see the work accomplished. And you already heard me share about Faye Mullins, this dear lady that stutters and has brought over 250 people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She's not a pastor. She's not on the conference payroll. She's a lay person who is a humble person and believes God can use her. And I believe more and more people will step up as we see the end approaching and begin engaging in the mission like Faye Mullins is doing. How many of you have heard of Ty Gibson? Has he ever been one of your speakers here at camp meeting? Okay. Did you know that Ty Gibson is planting a church? That's exciting, isn't it? He's called me a few times for some coaching with his church plant there in Eugene, Oregon, focused on reaching university students. Did you know another well-known Adventist here in North America is planting a church? I believe some of you probably heard of Mark Finley. Mark Finley is planting a church, and he's doing that in the Potomac Conference. So that's quite exciting as well to see these church leaders involved in church planting. There is a church plant in Chicago called Epic. Because it's in Chicago, it is close enough that I'm able to send my students from Andrews University to go and observe a church plant in person and to interact with it. Well, they've become very famous for something and known all around the division because they offer something called free hugs. What a strange concept. When I first heard about it, I said, that's just weird. You know, to go out on the sidewalks with these posters and say, we're giving free hugs. But you know, physical touch is so important, and some people never get a hug. And they've had people get off a bus and just run straight to them to get a hug because they want that free hug. And I didn't ever think you could grow a church by offering free hugs, but it's very interesting. In any case, when I've been to visit this church a couple of times, and while I was there on my second visit, I was able to meet the lady on the far left. Her name is Nina. Nina, when she was 16 years old, was pregnant, and as she went to deliver the baby in the hospital, something went terribly wrong, and she began to hemorrhage. And in fact, the hemorrhaging was so bad that Nina slipped into a coma. 2 weeks later, she woke up from the coma, a single parent, far from God, and began living her life without God. Well, her grew up, became a teenager herself, and Nina began to feel these impressions from God that she needed to go to church. But Nina said, God, I don't want to go to church. She didn't like church. She didn't want to go to church. But the impressions kept coming, and Nina kept telling God, no, I'm not going to go to church. But the impressions wouldn't stop, and finally Nina said, okay, God, I'm not going to go to church. The church has to come to me. And then she thought she was pretty clever, because how can the church come to her? That just doesn't make sense. Well, Nina was looking for employment and stopped by a theater. Now, this is a live theater with several rooms where live acting takes place. And it happened to be the only place our church plant, the Epic Church Plant, could find to rent. In fact, they held Sabbath school right beside a bar. You see the picture here? That's a bar in the background. Their Sabbath school class happens just right across from it. Now, I would never pick such a location for a church plant. You know, we actually have a church plant that meets in a morgue in Texas. But this church plant's meeting there in a bar. And as Nina's interviewing for this job, the man says, you know, we have an opening to serve at the bar on Saturday mornings. But you need to know that a church group meets there. She's shocked. She said, God, you answered my prayer. Not only did you bring the church to me, I'm going to get paid to go to church. So Nina slips to the end of the bar on Sabbath morning and begins listening to the Sabbath school class. By the 5th week, she has Bible open and is participating in the Sabbath school discussion. The Sabbath I was there, she took her lunch break so she could join the church for potluck. And you could see that God was working powerfully in her life and through this church plant. One of the reasons we plant churches, friends, is because it helps us reach people that we would not reach with our established churches. They simply would not come. New churches are approaching things in fresh and different ways. They're in different communities. They're trying to reach different groups of people, different types of ministries. And this will reach people that would not be reached by our established churches. So we don't need to wait till our churches fill up to go start a new church. In fact, starting a new church actually revitalizes the established church. It reinvigorates that established church that's been around for many years. We talk about the life cycle of a church and that churches grow old and they die. If you want to reset the clock on your church life cycle, plant a church. That will reset the clock. You can have a baby. Even if you're an old church, you can still have a baby, and it will make you new and fresh again. Continuing here, we have a couple of conferences in the North American division that have set a goal to plant 100 churches. One of those conferences is the Greater New York Conference. They set a goal to plant 100 churches in 5 years. That's exciting, isn't it? When I was in Texas conference, we planted 114 churches in 9 years. So if they're planting 100 in 5 years, that is a very rapid pace and quite exciting. One of those church plants is led by Pastor Everett Samuel. She is focused on reaching single moms. This is her audience. In fact, she brought some of those individuals to a church planting event that we have here. And it's quite exciting to see how God is leading her to single moms who will introduce other single moms to that ministry and so on. And God is blessing and growing that ministry in New York City. Another conference that has set a goal to plant 100 churches is the Potomac Conference. They set this goal a few years ago. They're well on pace to do that. And one of those very vibrant church plants is Restoration Praise Center that grew in just 6 years to 585 people in attendance. They've just built a building that will seat 900 people. Some church plants grow slowly, some grow very rapidly. But we need to plant to find out. Is it 30-fold, 60-fold, or are we going to have a 100-fold harvest? And this has just been a very dynamic church plant there. Another approach to church planting is something called house churches. Now, house churches is an old idea that's gaining some new interest today. But in the first century, the first few centuries of the church, people met in homes. That is where the churches met. When we talked about the church plant in Philippi, it probably met in Lydia's home. And so house churches is a biblical concept. And Reed Riccardi is one of these individuals that's planting house churches. In fact, he's planting a network of them, several of them that are in relationship with each other. One of the challenges with house churches is you can end up being isolated. But if you have a relationship with house churches that are in the same region or the same area, there's a synergy that can take place. You can plan ministry activities together. And there's so many positive things that can come from that. So this is what a house church looks like, people sitting around a living room and worshiping God. And what he does is once every 2 months, he'll bring all of the house churches together to have one meeting all together. And so that gives them a broader sense of community. So it's really a neat model of planting churches. And perhaps that's an area you would have an interest in. When we pass the card out, if you have an interest in house churches, just write house on there as an idea that you would like to explore further. Reach Philadelphia is a very dynamic community-based church plant. One thing that the North American Division is talking a lot about is how do we plant churches that make a difference in the community? If your church were to shut down, would your community notice that you're missing? Well, Reach Philadelphia, the community there would know that they're missing because they've done many things to help transform their community. One of the things they do is they plant community gardens, and I think I've got a picture of that, where they grow vegetables, and people from the community can come in and grow vegetables, and they offer fresh vegetables to people that live right there in that immediate community. They also offer tutoring for children that are struggling in school. So they're doing things to make a difference in the community. Sometimes we offer what we think the community wants rather than finding out what the community really needs. And community-based church plants want to find out what the community needs and find out how they can help meet that need. Now, I'd encourage our church plants not to try to do too many ministries, to do 1 or 2 ministries with excellence. And many of our smaller churches are trying to do too many things, and they're doing everything poorly rather than doing 1 or 2 things and being the best in the community at that ministry. When we do things with excellence, it attracts people. Excellence honors God and inspires people. And so I would encourage you to go back and look at the ministries of your church and say, are we trying to do too much? Are we doing things with excellence? And perhaps you need to pare down a little bit and focus on 1 or 2 areas that are quite effective in your community and focus on those things. Well, I had to put a church, I actually have 2 churches from the Carolina Conference here. The South Raleigh Church, the Little Creek Adventist Fellowship. Anybody here from that church? Okay, I see 1 person. In fact, Justin Smith, right, was in my youth group when I was an intern pastor, and he attends this church. He came and talked with me on Monday, so that was quite exciting. Well, why do we have this church on here and not one of the other church plants? It's because of something very special about this church plant, and I'm not sure if even the members totally realize this, but there's a picture of the church plant group. We, through our office at the North American Division Evangelism Institute, we score a survey called Natural Church Development. This survey will score the health of your church. How healthy is your church? We're not talking about physical health. We're talking about spiritual well-being. How well are you doing with your ministry? And you yourself score your church, but the survey's written in a very objective way, so you really can't fool the survey. And when we saw the results for this church, it was quite encouraging. Here are the results. Now, 50 is average. That dotted line going through the middle there, that's 50, all right? 65 is that next line up. If your church is above 65, you're about ready to be translated, okay? Only 15% of churches score above 65 in all 8 areas. Well, actually, above 65, period. Now, if you score above 65 in all 8 areas, you're guaranteed to be a growing church. What was their average score? Let's take a look at it here. Their average score was 92. Now, this isn't out of 100. This is a bell curve that goes off into an infinity, because they actually have one score, need or in evangelism. Their average score was 101. Now, they have a number of very high scores. Here's one right here. Question number 70. I know of a number of individuals in our church who have the gift of evangelism. Their score on that question was 107. We encourage new Christians in our church to get involved in evangelism immediately. That was 104. By the way, that question on the survey is the number 1 correlator as to whether an Adventist church is growing or declining. Let me read it again. If your church will score high on this question, you are going to be a growing Adventist church. If you score low on it, probably not. So here's the question again. We encourage new Christians in our church to get involved in evangelism immediately. So I want to congratulate this church, one of the highest scoring churches in the North American Division in terms of church health. Well done. And it was affirmed to me by my friend that was in my youth group. All right, another church plant, and I really want to applaud the vision of the Carolina Conference for employing Jimmy Shui. Jimmy Shui is an amazing man that spent over 20 years of his life in a refugee camp. But he is one of your pastors here in this conference. He is a church planter, but he has also borrowed, I think half of his salary comes from the North American division, because he has been commissioned to find any Burmese groups that are located anywhere in the United States and to help support them in getting started with a church plant, with a ministry. He has been able to start 46 new groups. These are refugees coming in from Burma. 46 new groups. But Carolina Conference had the vision to employ this man, Pastor Jimmy Shui, and start that first church plant right here. So let's give Carolina Conference a hand for that and give God a hand for that. That's very exciting. Now, you are part of something very big here that's impacting the whole division. Well, another one of those church plants to reach refugees is in the city of Indianapolis. They actually have 2 refugee church plants in one church. So there's the established church that meets there, and then 2 refugee plants that they open their doors to. And this one is the Mizo group. They have just actually found their own facility. The pastor of this church plant hopes to have 100 baptisms this year. So this is exciting to see how God is growing his work. Now, I want to share with you a Japanese concept called nimawashi. Nimawashi means to go around the roots. It's to prepare the soil to transplant. If you are in an established church, you need to nimawashi your church in order to get it ready to plant a church. You need to prepare the soil so that when you plant a church, you do it in a healthy way. We don't want church splits. We don't want to simply rearrange the saints. We want to plant churches that are going to be effective at reaching the harvest. And so nimawashi is this concept of preparing the soil. And so I want to just share with you a little bit about my own experience in North Dallas. This yellow dot represents the one church that was there in 1998 when I arrived in North Dallas. My job was to plant a church. That was what I was hired to do out of that one yellow dot, that one church. Now, it's a large church, but today we have all those new church plants that have started in that area. And so we started the one church with 415 people attending. By 2010, there were close to 2,000 people attending. I believe in 11 churches, I think the number's up to 13 now. But between 2002 and 2010, that mother church, along with the church plants, baptized 1,257 people. Just that clustering of churches. Now, what kind of growth rate is that? What's the percentage of conversion growth rate? What is the fastest growing division for the Adventist church? South American division is actually the fastest growing. Their baptismal growth rate, their conversion growth rate every year is close to around 10%. So if they have 100 people in a church, they're going to be baptizing 10. If they have 200, they're going to be baptizing 20. 10% baptismal growth rate. Well, if you have 200 and you baptize 20, how many do you need to baptize the next year? 22, right? And it's going to keep going up. And they're able to do that in the South American division. But what about North America? Take a look at this. What was the growth rate of that mother church along with the church plants? The 9-year average was 10.76%. In 2013, the South American division had an average of 10.53%, which means in an affluent area in North America, we were growing faster than the South American division. It can happen in North America, but it requires a combination of 2 things: church planting and evangelism. When you put those 2 things together, it's like gasoline and fire. Growth can begin to explode, but you need to do both. It's not either or, it needs to be both. But it's exciting to see that this can happen in North America. That area of North Dallas is affluent. We're working with wealthy people there, and yet we had that kind of a growth rate. So I believe that can happen here as well. In Texas, we have a church plant in San Antonio. By the way, with the GC session being there, the Texas conference focused on planting a number of new churches in San Antonio. One of those is called the Advent Project, and it's a young adult church plant. And so they're actually part of an established church. The Scenic Hills Church has 2 campuses. Rather than having an independent church plant, they started a Spanish church plant in their fellowship hall that will always remain in their fellowship hall. They may plant a church that goes out, but there'll always be a Spanish church plant in their fellowship hall. Across the highway, they started a young adult church plant that also is a part of them. So all 3 of these churches are one church. Does that make sense? They all work together harmoniously as a church, as a whole project there to reach that area. In Florida is leading the way with a program called the VLP, Volunteer Lay Pastor Program, where they are encouraging lay people to lead some of their churches as well as to plant new churches. And when we were planting there in Texas, our 114 church plants, over 60 of those were led by lay people. You realize that most pastors, well, in fact, all pastors were lay people at one time, right? They're pastors now because they're hired to be pastors, but they were a lay person at one point in time. And so lay people really can have the gift to plant a church. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's very biblical that the priesthood of all believers means that we all need to be involved in doing ministry, and leading a church can be done by a lay person or by a pastor. Well, they have close to 90 lay pastors in the Florida conference. And it's exciting to see the kind of ministry that is happening there. A couple of the churches that are led by lay people are, 300-400 people attending. So very exciting. Many are much smaller, but there's some large ones as well. Florida has been very intentional about their major cities. Tampa Bay is one example. Anthony Wagner Smith is now starting his 2nd church plant there in Tampa Bay. And again, Florida Hospital's moving in there, and so they want to be prepared to start new churches to accommodate the kind of growth that they expect will happen. Now let's look at some international church plants that are happening. In England, since 2007, I've gone to England on an average of twice a year. I have a real passion to see God's work move forward in England. And it's exciting to see what's happening in both conferences there, in the South England Conference and North England Conference. On the right there is a man by the name of Eris. He's recently retired, but he really spearheaded church planting in South England. And I believe they have about 60 church plants in the South England Conference that they're working with. And then Michael Simpson there in the north, and I believe they have over 30 church plants that they're working with in the North England Conference. One of the challenges is that the church in England has largely become an immigrant church. And they're not reaching the majority population like they used to. And so one of the goals with church planting is to once again reach out to that majority population. You can see from the picture here that there are a lot of Anglos there in that picture, aren't there, in this church plant? Because church plants can do things in new ways, with new approaches, and can make inroads with groups that we may not be reaching otherwise. And so it's exciting to see those doors opening. I'm told in North England, almost all of the church plants will have some Anglos attending. So we want to reach everybody that's receptive, but we don't want to leave groups behind either. And so we want to be very intentional in order to reach all people. We talked yesterday about Phyllis Pearson planting a church in a Muslim community there in London, the Serenity House Church. I want to just share a little moment here about the Baltic Union. I'd shared before that this is the most secular part of the world, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And this is a picture of Riga, a beautiful city, very clean city. You don't see any trash in Riga. It's the only city I've ever seen in the world where they plant vegetables as in their flower beds as decoration around the city. So that's kind of a unique thing, but just a beautiful city. One church has been added in the last 9 years, and they've had membership losses in 8 of the last 11 years. So this is not a movement. Things are not going the right direction. But this is where my wife and I are adopting from. You can see the 2 small boys in the middle. Those are the boys from the orphanage that we're adopting from. In fact, they arrive a week from Sunday to be here with us for the summer. And they're just great kids. We don't know if the younger one there, the little one, if he'll have his front teeth yet. We've been hosting for 2 years and still no front teeth. X-ray says they're coming, but we don't know. we haven't seen them yet. But we hope by this fall that they'll be fully adopted. And here we have, even in Latvia there, we were able to take the boys to do some things with us, and so it's a lot of fun. But this was a Seeds conference that we did there in Latvia. The seminar we did yesterday, Spiritual Conversations with Secular People. Look at the interest that's there. It's exciting to see it. And in fact, we had 26 people say that they would be willing to lead a church plant. And then we also had 16 decisions for baptism right there at the conference this last fall in Latvia. This is Erlo Brown, probably one of the foremost leaders, certainly one of the most foremost leaders in church planting in the Adventist world. I was just down in Brazil this last year, and I visited 3 different conferences there, and one of them was the conference he's the president of. And they had set a goal to plant 30 churches this year, 2016. I met with the pastors, and he had decision cards ready. I mean, this man's prepared. And before we left the building, he had texted us to say that they're not going to plant 30 churches in 2016. They're going to plant 60 churches in 2016. So praise God for that. We are going to be having a Seeds conference in August. My ticket has just been purchased. A Seeds church planting conference, 2 of them actually. One in his conference in August coming up. This is one of the very creative church plants, Nova Semente. This is Kleber Gonçalves. He planted a church to reach the affluent in downtown Brazil. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Nobody was reaching them. And he planted a very effective church plant there that grew to well over 1,000 members. He is now the director for the Doctor of Ministry program at Andrews University. So he's just moved from that church plant. It's exciting to see a church planter that's training our pastors, isn't it? And so that's really exciting to see. Australia is, I have to say, is my favorite country in the world. I'm a Texan American, and proud of that. But we are absolutely in love with Australia. The only reason we're not living there is because God hasn't opened the door for us. I have a standing call to go and pastor there or be involved in ministry there. But my wife is afraid of the snakes. So that really is the bottom line. It's the only thing that's keeping us from living in Australia, but we love it there. But not all of Australia is beautiful. In fact, the outback is very desolate. And my personal friend, their conference president of North New South Wales Conference, on my last visit before last, he said, Tom, we need to take you to the outback to visit one of our church plants. Well, how are we going to get there? In a single-engine plane. I don't think so. No. I have avoided getting a single-engine plane my whole ministry. Said I'm not going to do it. But I decided, you know what, let's go ahead and do it. I want to go out and see this church plant way in the outback, and certainly we don't want to try driving out there. So they actually put me in the co-pilot seat, which was a little scary because I had no idea what to do. But we went all the way out there and landed at this desolate airport, abandoned airport. Right there in the middle, you see a church planting couple. She's a Bible worker. He is an Aboriginal. And so they're actually planting in an Aboriginal community. They were so excited because in the hat there, that's the conference president. On the left there, I'm in the far right in the hat, and I have a young man I'm mentoring that was there with me, Adam. But they were so excited to have visitors coming all the way out there to see their church plant. Look at the community they're reaching. The needs are just huge. And it's so exciting to see that even to the furthermost parts of the earth, the Adventist message is being shared. By the way, the conference rewarded this couple. They said, you are in an extremely difficult place where you're working. They gave them a brand new 4-wheel drive vehicle for them to drive as long as they're pastoring in that district. So they drove up with this beautiful car for us to go around, and the people from the community run up to the windows of the car there to greet us as we drove through the streets. They're well loved and doing a very beautiful work there. Did you know David Asscherick is involved in church planting? Do you know David Asscherick? Yeah, sure. He is living in Australia now, but his church is a Kingscliff Church, and they're involved in church planting in an area called Tweed Heads. This couple right here, Dan and Alicia Christie, are the church planters. We've had them come over a couple times here to the U.S. to talk about church planting. But their focus is to reach young adults, young men. And in fact, this young man right here with the beautiful hair, the dreadlocks, he is their Bible worker. He is a soul winner. You would never guess. You meet this young man, you would never guess it. You think he's a beach bum. He walks around barefoot and has his dreads, but he is meeting people and he is passionate about Jesus. And he's giving Bible studies. You can't judge a book by its cover, right? It's exciting to see, and I think you would even enjoy him as a Bible worker in your church because he's just such a wonderful person. He'll win your heart. At first, I was afraid he's going to meet my daughter and marry her. That was my first thought. I was like, no! But, God is using him in a powerful way. Now that I know him, I say that wouldn't be all bad. Melbourne, Australia. This is Johnny Wong. Johnny Wong has a vision for reaching university students. By the way, Melbourne, Australia has been voted the #1 city in the world, the most livable city in the world. It's absolutely a beautiful place. But of course, our home's in heaven, right? We don't have to live. You guys already live in the most beautiful place in America right here, right? But anyway, they have 14 groups that meet on Friday evenings. They come together as church plants on Sabbath morning. We already touched on that one. In Hong Kong, 7.24 million people. 4 churches have been added in the last 40 years. That's too slow, isn't it? The current total of churches is 19 with 7.24 million people. Johnny Wong left his comfortable home in Melbourne, Australia, and moved to a small apartment in Hong Kong to plant a church. And there's his church plant core group. He was excited to send me this picture to see that a new church is being opened up there in Hong Kong. I want to conclude by a visit that I had in March to Southeast Asia. And the first visit was to Thailand. And I met there in Thailand, in the city of Muak, the mushroom pastor. Why is he called the mushroom pastor? In fact, the whole community knows him as the mushroom pastor. It's because he is growing mushrooms to help raise money for the church plant, as well as to meet people for Jesus in the marketplace. So in that particular village, the market is a big deal. They run a night market, I think 3 nights a week, and he's there with his mushroom stand. And he's making friends with the other vendors, with the customers that come into the marketplace, and he's known in the whole village. I was a little put off by some of the things that I found there, deep-fried grasshoppers and cockroaches. I didn't think that was too appetizing. But in any case, here are some of the vendors, and you can see how he's meeting people. But this lady right here in the bright blue shirt, I met her. It was her, and it's very interesting. When they pray, it's like this. When you meet somebody, you bow your head. When you go in a house, you take your shoes off. It's a whole different culture. But as I met this lady, I discovered it was her 3rd Sabbath to visit this church. And she is a vendor in the market and had met the mushroom pastor, and he had invited her to come to church, and she came because they built a friendship, right? That natural bridge built a friendship. I asked her if she liked the deep-fried grasshoppers, and she nodded her head. She liked deep-fried grasshoppers still. And by the way, they're clean. I can't believe it, but according to Leviticus, they're clean. All right, final story. This man is the rock pastor, or another way to refer to his story is the miracle rock. And by the way, if you like miracle stories of how God is working, in the building next door, downstairs, there's a booth, ASAP Ministries, Advocates for Southeast Asians and the Persecuted. I'm the board chair for that ministry. It's located in Berrien Springs, but all the ministry happens in Southeast Asia or with refugees in the United States. And I can tell you that we experience miracles in that ministry constantly. But there's 10 top miracle stories, a free booklet you can pick up downstairs at the ASAP booth. I'm going to swing by there afterwards so that I can meet some of you there if you'd like to swing by and see that booth. But one of the men that I met that is sponsored by ASAP Ministries, my wife and I also sponsor a church planter in the country of Laos. But this man, as you can see, is very short in stature, but he has a big heart for God. What happened is the conference president and the youth director needed to deliver some literature, some materials to a school in a remote village. So they got in their car and they began to drive out to this remote village, but they knew that they had to pass over a river, drive through a river in order to get there. Well, the problem was dusk was coming as they arrived at the river, and as they went into the river, their car got stuck on a rock. And it would not move. They tried everything they could do to get that car off the rock, and it wouldn't move. Nighttime is coming on. They finally were able to dig the rock out, pushed the car back out of the water, but it wouldn't start. They tried to charge the battery, wouldn't start. They tried to push it, start it that way, wouldn't start. So now the youth director says, I'm here with the conference president. I need to find a place for him to stay tonight. And so he went to find the village chief. Well, the village chief was not available. He found the assistant village chief, who happened to be this man right up here on the screen that we just showed you, the rock pastor. That was the assistant village chief. And he began visiting with him, and he said, we're stuck. I need to stay with the car, so nobody takes the car. But can my friend that's with me, can he stay with you? Now recognize, Laos is a communist country. You do not openly share your faith. You cannot proselytize. People have to come to you. And so as the conference president goes to stay in the home of the assistant village chief, he's very concerned about what to share about himself, right? And sure enough, the village chief begins to ask him questions. And he quickly communicates with God and decides that he should be open with him. And he lets him know that he's a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. As soon as he said that, the village chief ran to a desk and pulled out from a drawer there a certificate that he graduated many years ago from the Voice of Prophecy Bible Study School. He was so excited. They stayed up all night talking about the Seventh-day Adventist Church and our beliefs from Scripture. He was very excited. Well, he invited them to come back and share with the other village leaders. The next morning, they got up, and guess what happened to the car? Started without a problem. They didn't want to stop it. They drove it to a mechanic and pulled in the mechanic. The mechanic said, there's nothing wrong with your car. So it's a miracle rock, they called it. The car stopped at the right place to meet this man. Well, they came back to the village to teach them more about our truths, and 23 leaders from those villages were baptized. And when I met with the rock pastor, he told me that there are now 300 people ready to be baptized in those communities. This isn't a communist country where there's only 1,200 Adventists. So to baptize 300 is an absolute miracle. It's amazing to see what God is doing there. As we conclude here, I want to just look at some statistics with you. There should be one Adventist church for every 25,000 people. How is it in your community? How is it where you live? One Adventist church. And of course, if there's not 25,000 people, we still need an Adventist church in the smaller communities as well. The population of the North American division is 354 million people, and slightly more than that, 354 million people. We have 6,277 churches, but we need 14,162 so that we would have one Adventist church for every 25,000 people. That is really a minimum number. A faith goal really should be one Adventist church for every 10,000 people. So as you can see, we need a lot more churches than we have. We don't have enough churches. And we need to reach population groups as well as people groups. So the North American Division has set a goal of planting 1,000 churches in the next 5 years. So 200 churches a year. Plant 1,000 initiative is what it's called. You'll probably be hearing more about it. I know the Carolina Conference is participating in that goal. So right now, if you'd raise your hand up, I don't know where the cards are at, but if you would like to, Pastor Brad has them. If you would like to indicate your interest in church planting, just raise your hand up as Pastor Brad comes by. He will get you a card. Fill that out and give it to him. I can tell you it is a great adventure. If you want to see God doing miracles, get involved in church planting. If you want to be part of the cutting edge. In fact, church planting can be called the extreme sports of Christianity. It's a lot of fun. It's an adventure for God. All right. And here's our final challenge here for our 5 days together. The Radical Hospitality Challenge. Today's the day I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to see how many of you are willing to make that commitment, and I'm raising my hand with you. Oh yeah, put a house if you'd like to be a house church. And don't forget Brad's manual there with my manual over at the bookstore. This is our last day to say something about it. His is only $9, mine's $15, all right? So get both and it's a good deal still. All right. So here's the Radical Hospitality Challenge. During the month of June, invite an unchurched person or family or a non-Adventist to your home for a meal, a barbecue, or a picnic. As you prayed about it, as you've contemplated about that, would you raise your hand now if you'd like to make that commitment? The month of June. Raise your hand high. All right. As you raise your hand, I'd like to pray for you. Dear Lord, you see the hands raised. We want to engage with people who don't know you. We want to step outside of our comfort zone. Lord, we talked about how important it is to be on mission for you. I want to pray for each person that has raised their hand, that they'll be inviting somebody to their home. I want to pray that you'll make a divine appointment for the person or family that you'd like for them to invite. Maybe they'll invite one, maybe they'll invite two, maybe it'll be more. But Lord, I want to pray that this will be something that will continue, that will be a habit in our lives until you come. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, here's the quiz. We have to show you that. How often does a new Seventh-day Adventist church start? Once every 3.5 hours. Okay, very good. How did Nina find the epic SDA church plant? Strangely, she was looking for a job as a bartender. Doesn't God work in amazing ways? The next one here. Everett Samuel is planting a church in New York City to reach who? Single moms. And finally, what employment does a pastor in Thailand have that helps him meet people and introduce them to Jesus? He is a mushroom farmer. All righty, well, pray that you have a blessed day. I'm going to head right now over to the downstairs to meet some of you who'd like to learn more about ASAP Ministries and pick up one of the Miracle Story books while you're there.